Imagine being locked up in one of the toughest prisons in the world, under constant surveillance. No one has ever escaped. No one. Except for one man. His name? Yoshie Shiratori. This is the story of a man who defied the odds and managed to escape Japanese prisons 4 times. A story of cunning, willpower, and unbelievable persistence. Yoshie Shiratori had been wrongfully convicted of a crime he didn't commit. Falsely accused of murder, beaten and tortured nightly by the prison guards, Shiratori had one goal: freedom. And in 1936, after enduring years of injustice, he finally decided to make his move. But Aomori prison wasn't an easy place to escape from. It was heavily guarded with high walls and a system built to prevent escapes. But Shiratori had studied the guards' routines for months. He knew exactly when there was a gap in their patrols, a 15-minute window when he could act. At precisely 5:30 a.m., with the cold winter air biting at his skin, Shiratori pulled out a metal wire, a tool he had smuggled in from the bathhouse. This wire, originally part of the metal support ring around a bathing bucket, was now his only tool for freedom. Minutes felt like hours. His fingers ached, but his concentration never wavered. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the lock clicked open. Shiratori was out of his cell, but the danger wasn't over. The prison was filled with locked doors, each one standing between him and freedom. And with every passing second, the risk of being caught increased. After a tense few minutes, Shiratori found himself outside the prison walls, in the prison yard, but still inside the larger search perimeter. The guards, now beginning their rounds, could raise the alarm at any moment. At 5:45 a.m., the guards returned. As they peered into Shiratori's cell, they saw what appeared to be him, sound asleep under his blanket. But what they didn't realize was that the futon was a decoy, and beneath it was a pile of loose floorboards designed to fool them. It wasn't until the next morning that the guards realized the deception. But by then, Shiratori was long gone, out of the prison's perimeter and free for the time being. However, if you think Shiratori's escape was a success, think again. The freedom he'd gained was brief. Just 3 days later, he was captured in a hospital, attempting to steal medical supplies to survive. And just like that, the world's most elusive escape artist was back in the clutches of the law. Shiratori's second capture led to an even harsher sentence. In 1942, 6 years after his first escape, he was transferred to Akita prison. Here, the conditions were even more brutal. The guards were ruthless, and they had one goal: to break him. Akita was built to prevent people like Shiratori from ever escaping. The smooth copper walls were impossible to climb, and the high ceilings made it nearly impossible to find any leverage. But if anyone could escape this fortress, it was Shiratori. As time passed, Shiratori's spirit only grew stronger. He had been beaten down physically, but his mind, his will, remained unbroken. He knew that to escape Akita prison, he would need to rely on his ingenuity. The conditions were grim. Solitary confinement, physical torture, and freezing temperatures were part of his daily routine. But Shiratori was no ordinary man. He was a master escape artist, and Akita's oppressive walls were just another challenge. Shiratori was given minimal food, kept in isolation, and constantly under surveillance. But he had learned how to make the most of his meager resources. One day, as he carefully observed the space around him, he discovered a loose bit of wire, perhaps from an item his friend Kobayashi had brought him. It was nothing much, but for Shiratori, it was just enough. Having freed himself from his handcuffs, Shiratori started thinking about the impossible, scaling the smooth copper walls of Akita prison. But where others saw an insurmountable obstacle, Shiratori saw opportunity. He used his hands and feet, placing his palms and soles on the copper sheets, creating leverage as he climbed the unclimbable walls. Shiratori's extraordinary skill as an expert climber came into play. He scaled the walls with the uncanny precision of a lizard, defying what should have been impossible. Once he reached the skylight, he found that it was sealed tight. But as he examined the area around the window, he noticed something crucial. The wooden framing was rotting. This was the break he had been waiting for. For weeks, night after night, Shiratori climbed the copper walls when the guards weren't looking. Little by little, he began to loosen the rotting wooden frame. Each night, he would work in small, careful increments, ensuring that he left no trace of his efforts. After finishing for the night, he'd climb back down, carefully place his handcuffs back on, and return to his position, making sure not to arouse any suspicion. It took months, but eventually, the window came loose. Shiratori could feel the weight of his effort paying off. All that was left was to wait for the right moment. The perfect moment arrived during a particularly stormy night. With the weather serving as cover for any sounds of movement, Shiratori knew this was his chance. He climbed up the copper wall one final time, and with a combination of patience, skill, and determination, he pried open the window. Once the window was open, there was nothing standing between him and freedom. Shiratori slipped out into the night, once again escaping the inescapable, and Shiratori was free again. 3 months after escaping Akita prison, Shiratori showed up at the door of Kobayashi, the one guard who had treated him with respect. Disheveled and desperate, Shiratori explained his plan to expose the cruelty of the prison system and file a civil lawsuit for justice. He asked Kobayashi to vouch for him. However, while Shiratori was in the bathroom, Kobayashi called the police. Shiratori was quickly recaptured and sent back to prison, his ambitious plan shattered. He was once again thrown into the unforgiving hands of the Japanese justice system. This time, however, the authorities had no intention of letting him escape. They sent him to Abashiri prison, located in the frozen wilderness of Hokkaido, the northernmost part of Japan. A notorious facility known for its brutal conditions, Abashiri had earned a reputation as a prison without escape, where the relentless cold, combined with its near impenetrable walls, seemed to ensure that no one would ever break free. Shiratori was immediately struck by the contrast in conditions. The cold was unbearable, with temperatures regularly plunging far below freezing. When prisoners were served food, even the miso soup and soy sauce would freeze before they could eat. It was an environment designed to crush even the most defiant souls. Despite being dressed in summer clothing and thrust into the icy chill, Shiratori remained unfazed. His resilience, however, was met with even harsher treatment. Unlike his previous incarcerations, this time, Shiratori was shackled with 20-kilogram handcuffs and leg cuffs, specially designed to prevent any possibility of escape. The cuffs had no keyholes, and they could only be removed through a lengthy process by 2 metalwork specialists who came only once every few weeks. His movements were severely restricted, and every aspect of his life in Abashiri was designed to break him physically and mentally. But Shiratori was no ordinary man. As cold as the conditions were, and as painful as the restraints were, he was not one to give up easily. Shiratori was determined that, one way or another, he would escape again. He had already defied the odds twice before, and this was no different. Even in the freezing, suffocating atmosphere of Abashiri, he was mentally preparing himself for a third escape. Months went by, and life in the prison was a nightmare. But despite the extreme conditions, Shiratori had a secret weapon: time. With nothing but time to strategize, he began to find small ways to weaken the prison's restraints. Every time the guard slid his meal through the small opening in his cell, he would take a bit of the miso soup and carefully rub it onto the steel frame of his cell, his handcuffs and his leg cuffs. Over time, the salt from the soup corroded the metal, causing the screws and bolts to loosen. This process took several months, but by spring, Shiratori was finally able to remove the handcuffs and leg cuffs as well as loosen the steel frame around the inspection window. But the escape was not without its challenges. The opening in the window was smaller than his body, designed by the guards to prevent him from squeezing through. However, Shiratori's physical abilities were unlike anyone else's. Not only could he climb walls like a lizard, but he also possessed the rare ability to dislocate his joints. With this, he was able to squeeze through the small window opening, inching his way out like a caterpillar. One night in August, while a guard was doing paperwork, he heard a strange sound coming from the roof. He investigated and discovered that Shiratori was gone. His bed was neatly made, his clothes folded, and the heavy cuffs were left behind. The alarm was raised immediately, but despite an intense manhunt, Shiratori had vanished without a trace. Once again, Shiratori had defied the impossible, escaping from Abashiri prison, a place that had been considered escape-proof. For the third time, Yoshie Shiratori was free. After Shiratori's third escape, he lived for a while in hiding, but his freedom was short-lived. While on the run, he was mistaken by a local farmer for a notorious thief. A struggle ensued, and the farmer was fatally wounded, leading to Shiratori's arrest for murder. Despite claiming self-defense, the authorities quickly realized they had captured the infamous Yoshie Shiratori once again. This time, Shiratori was not only facing charges for multiple escapes, but also the murder of the farmer. The District Court of Sapporo sentenced him to death. In 1947, he was moved to Sapporo prison, where he was placed on death row, awaiting execution. To prevent him from escaping for a fourth time, the authorities took no chances. Shiratori was placed under 24-hour surveillance, with 6 armed guards assigned to watch him around the clock. His cell was reinforced with steel doors, reinforced ceilings, bars and windows, leaving no obvious openings. Any gaps were made smaller than the size of his head. Learning from the previous escapes where Shiratori had used his ability to dislocate his joints to squeeze through small spaces, the guards were confident this time would be different. Shiratori was getting older, and they doubted his ability to escape. Days turned into weeks, and with his execution drawing closer, Shiratori seemed to lose hope. He spent most of his days in bed, staring at the ceiling, refusing to get up, despite orders from the guards. They assumed he had given up. But while they were focused on Shiratori's apparent despair, they overlooked something crucial: the bottom of the cell. From the start, the authorities had assumed Shiratori's escape would come through a skylight or window, just like his previous escapes. To make sure this didn't happen, they had reinforced every opening, leaving no space for him to climb through. What they didn't anticipate was Shiratori's focus on the floor. Over the next month, Shiratori began working quietly at the floorboards, using random cutlery and a miso soup bowl to slowly pry them loose. It wasn't easy, but Shiratori had experience. Each night, after his digging, he would carefully replace the boards, concealing the hole under his futon. The guards, preoccupied with his behavior of looking upward, never suspected the ground beneath him was slowly giving way. It took over a month, but by the time winter arrived, Shiratori had created a hole big enough to crawl through. One morning, when the guards came to check on him, they found his bed undisturbed but empty. The futon had been flipped, and there was no trace of him. They searched frantically, but it was too late. Shiratori had escaped, once again, outwitting the authorities. His escape had been so simple and effective, and yet it had been the last thing they expected. He had escaped by going down, not up. The guards had been so focused on preventing him from climbing through windows that they completely missed the vulnerability in the floor. Shiratori lived in hiding for a time, but his freedom was short-lived. One fateful day, a stranger offered him a cigarette, a simple act of kindness that would prove to be his undoing. Perhaps it was a moment of weakness or the growing toll of his years on the run, but Shiratori accepted. Soon after, he was captured again. But this time, things were different. This time, there was a change in Japan's justice system. In 1947, a court re-examined his case. The charges that first landed Shiratori behind bars were found to be baseless. The murder he was accused of? The real killer had already been caught. After more than a decade of abuse, survival, and sheer determination, Shiratori was finally acquitted. Shiratori spent the rest of his life as a free man. He never escaped again, because he never had to. He lived quietly in Tokyo, eventually working at a fish market. The man who once outwitted the unbreakable now lived among everyday people, unnoticed, unchained, and unafraid. Shiratori died in 1979 at the age of 71, but his legacy, that lives on. He is remembered in books, folklore, and even pop culture as Japan's greatest escape artist, a man who refused to be broken, even when the world tried its hardest to crush him. Yoshie Shiratori didn't escape just to be free. He escaped to prove he was more than what the system said he was.